So about a week ago I was in sunny Egypt and I got to dive what many consider one of the top 5 shipwrecks in the world. I had the opportunity to dive the SS Thistlegorm. So in today's video I'll show you some of the life that lives on the wreck and some of the really cool history inside it. My name's Adam and welcome to Nature Scope. In this first section of the video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Thistlegorm and why it came to be shipwrecked where it is. If you're not interested in that or already know it, I'm going to leave a timestamp on screen. Just skip to that and you'll get straight to the scuba diving part. The SS Thistlegorm is a British built ship and it was built in the north of England in 1940. Pretty long story as to why it sank, but the short of it is it was shot by a German warship in 1941 off the coast of Egypt. Things like food, ammunition, bombs and stuff were all on this ship, and for many decades it remained undiscovered until famous marine biologist and explorer Jacques Cousteau found it. The wreck then got lost again and found again and lost again. And you can see how it goes until eventually in the early 90s it was found, it was marked and it was then open to the public for scuba diving. The wreck sits at about 30 meters depth and is over 100 meters long, so you can understand why it's perfect for scuba diving. It's quite a shallow wreck and there's lots to see.
It was an incredibly early start, a 5 AM start with a coach taking us straight to the harbour. Once we were there it was really calm seas and it was time to board our boat, the Bella 2. It wasn't a short trip by boat either. Leaving from the port of Sharm El Sheikh, it was about a 3-hour boat ride round the coast until we finally reached the destination, which was the wreck of the SS Thistlegorm. So we left the harbour at 6 AM and began preparing ourselves for the dives ahead. The crew of the Bella 2 spent the majority of the trip trying to catch some fish, and eventually they were successful. They managed to reel in this tuna, which the crew split and took home for dinner. Before we knew it, it was time to get ready to dive. All the kit was prepared and all we had to do was jump into the water.
So we had the opportunity to do 2 dives on the wreck, and for the first dive I took the GoPro. You can see the path we took on screen now on the map, but we basically took an outside route, seeing kind of everything it has to offer on the outside. So we're going to meet up with me in the water after we entered. Let's see what the outside of the Thistlegorm had to offer.
Instantly dropping down onto the wreck was a pretty weird experience. Usually when you get into the water you're used to seeing nothing or a coral reef or something like that, but to instantly see this massive ship was kind of weird. It wasn't until my dive guide shone the torch on this scorpionfish that it was really clear to see. They've got such good camouflage. You can probably tell by the footage on screen that the visibility that day wasn't great. It was probably between about 10 and 15 meters vis, which for what we dived in Egypt so far wasn't fantastic. You didn't need that incredible visibility though to understand what you were diving. You could see the wreck and see how big it was just by being up close to it. This was one of the locomotives that the ship was carrying. When the ship got bombed, the hole in the side of it caused this to fall out and it lays just by the side of the wreck. These boxes that you can see me swimming over now also fell out of that same hole, and these are ammunition boxes. These would have contained bombs, ammunition, grenades, that sort of stuff. Unfortunately though, a lot of it has either been removed or stolen. Unfortunately, a lot of it has been stolen or lost, but you can see what we're swimming over now is a mixture of car parts, things like tyres, exhaust, stuff like that. Some of the munitions boxes still had stuff in now, and as my dive guide pointed out with this torch, this one still had bombs inside. This was probably the highlight of the dive for me. This is the anti-aircraft gun that sits on the top of the ship. And just next to it, past my dive guide, is an anti-aircraft machine gun. The sides of the shipwreck were absolutely full of life. You can see coral and algae growing on top of it, as well as a multitude of fish and starfish and shrimp, all that sort of stuff. There's just so much life living on this wreck. This clip gives you a better view of the hole that was ripped into the side of the ship when the Germans bombed it. This section is at the very back of the ship and is where the captain would have manned the wheel. Towards the end of the dive, the current really picked up, and as we ascended back to the boat, you can see me struggling here to hold on to the rope.
That was really, really cool. So many fish to see, so much history to see, those guns and the ammunition. It was just amazing to see. But just seeing how kind of this wreck that sits in the sea has been taken over by so much sea life, it's just amazing. So the second dive we did was a bit more advanced, and my girlfriend Caitlin took the GoPro for this one. And as you can see on the map on screen now, they basically went straight down into the wreck and through it. So in this one you'll see things like jeeps, things like motorbikes, sidecars for motorbikes, and a lot more of the kind of World War II history. So let's take a look at the footage from that second dive.
You can already tell straight off the bat that this dive was a lot more advanced. There was a lot more tight squeezes and your buoyancy had to be on point. It was also a lot darker inside, so torches were necessary to help see anything that was in there. On this dive there were so many tight squeezes. You can see on the screen now just how hard it was. I was told that at some points between the floor and the ceiling there was about a 2 meter gap, so like I said before, your buoyancy had to be perfect, making sure you didn't hit the roof and didn't hit the floor. This is the propeller of the ship that would have powered it through the sea. It was absolutely huge. In this part of the dive you may start to notice some familiar shapes amongst the metal. This is the part of the dive where the jeeps and the motorbikes and the sidecars and more of the car parts were kept. I found watching this footage as they swam through the wreck kind of eerie. There was a crew of 42 men on board the Thistlegorm, and unfortunately 9 of them lost their lives during the attack. 5 of the 9 who died were British Royal Navy, who were likely manning the guns that you saw in the first dive. It's just really important to remember that if you are diving this site, it is not just a shipwreck, people lost their lives here, and it's an important historical monument. Another tight squeeze led to a room that was absolutely full of jeeps. In the back of the jeeps you'll notice that they're also full of motorbikes. The handlebars had been stolen now as people had took them for souvenirs, which is kind of bad, but it is what it is. It's still really cool to see. It's really weird to think that even after 80 years at sea, you can still tell what these are. Obviously seawater is heavily corrosive, so you'd expect it to corrode a little bit more, but the fact that you can tell what the jeeps are and what the motorbikes are is really, really cool. In the back of this jeep were 3 motorbikes, and like I said, after 80 years you can still tell they're motorbikes. The tyres are still there and the individual parts are still there. Again, the handlebars had been stolen, but it was still pretty awesome to see this footage. And in the jeep right next to it was a sidecar. This would have been attached to a motorbike to make it a kind of 4-wheeled vehicle, and someone could have sat inside there. If you've seen Wallace and Gromit, they tend to use one. These would have been larger flatbed vehicles, massive vans, things like that. You can still see the tyres are intact underneath them, and most of the planks are even intact too. You may see a few times on this second dive that the dive leader spins his torch around, and this is nothing to worry about, it's just him making sure that the rest of the divers are okay. Because visibility was quite hard, you can't give the usual okay signal. They swam along into a second room now that was again full of flatbed trucks and jeeps and a few motorbikes. You just have to think how many motorbikes and how much product was on this ship, and how much money the people sending over the product must have lost. The fact that after 80 years the tyres are still pretty much perfect gives us a real insight into what it's like to have plastic in the ocean. It doesn't degrade quickly and it stays around for a long, long time. The footage you're seeing now is from the very front of the ship, so these are the winches that would have been used to pull the stuff on board the ship. This was a tank cart and it was likely filled with oil. This is one of those things that when you see the big industrial trains coming through and it has the oil tankers on the back, this would have gone on the back of there. Just before the dive finished, there was time for a quick swim through one of the sections at the front of the ship. It was filled with barrels, perhaps containing food and reserves for the trip. With that, it was time to leave the wreck and begin the ascension to the surface to finish the dive. It was really cool taking a look inside the ship and seeing what was in there.
I really hope you enjoyed the video. It was incredible to see some history and be able to swim amongst it, amongst the fish that have taken it over, as well as some of the really cool monuments and artifacts and kind of bits of British and World War II history that you don't get to see that often. You may have noticed in the video a lot of things have been stolen, so car parts, handlebars on motorbikes, boots, Even things like bits of metal that were just hanging off the ship, they've been stolen. So the ship is not in the best condition, but it's still really, really cool to see. Got a few more videos coming from my trip to Egypt, including some coral reef diving videos. They'll be up in the next few weeks, so subscribe and turn that bell notification on to not miss those. If you have any questions about diving the Thistlegorm, or you've dived it yourself and want to tell your story, please feel free to drop it in the comments below. Thanks again for watching the video, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers.